Hey Falcons, I'm McKenna and thanks for being with us for another Tune In Tuesday episode. Those of you preparing to graduate, this episode's for you. Our guest is Scott and he's a regional economist with the Department of Workforce Development. Scott is going to give us the inside scoop on the most current job market data for our region. This will help you know which industries are doing the most hiring and where you have the best odds of being able to apply. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Scott Hodak. I'm the Chief of the Office of Economic Advisors with Wisconsin's Department of Workforce Development. I'm here today to talk with you a little bit about what the economy looks like right now, given the pandemic, and what we expect to see in the coming months and even years. And I'll also be showing you some tools that I think will be useful in your search for employment in this difficult time, and then also some general advice that should hopefully help you out in finding employment right now. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you here is this is our labor market information website. It's called Wisconomy.com. And who says economists don't have a sense of humor? But basically all you have to do is type that into your browser address bar, Wisconomy.com, or you can go to a lot of other DWD websites and DWD is Department of Workforce Development. So like Job Center of Wisconsin, which we'll be talking about a little later in this presentation as well, we'll have links to Wisconomy. And basically, what you can do here is look at overall economic conditions and all kinds of different metrics that should be helpful. Personally, there's a ton of information on here, but personally, I like to use dashboard view to find what I'm looking for. And right now, I'm just going to give you a little background on what we're seeing right now economically. So these are the jobs numbers in Wisconsin. And basically what you can see here is that after the last recession, they were pretty much trending upwards. And then essentially in the space of 1 month, from March to April of 2020, as COVID really started to impact the state in general, we lost about 400,000 jobs, over 400,000 jobs, essentially in 1 month. Which is, if you look at this trend, like nothing we've ever seen. Now, you can see here from this V shape, unlike this kind of recession where you go into it gradually, you come out gradually, shock type events to the economy tend to have kind of a V shape where you go down quickly and you come back quickly. But and you can see that we have recovered a decent number of those jobs, but we're not back to where we were yet. And that's kind of the whole moral of this story right now, is that everything we're seeing is related to COVID-19. So if we were to have a sudden surge, or if restrictions had to be put in place again, we could just as easily see that trend go downwards again. But right now we are seeing some recovery. But it's a difficult time to look for work. Now that said, some industries have fared better than others. Like things like hotels and bars and restaurants have had a very difficult go of it, no doubt, as consumers have decided not to frequent them or go in person to these places because of perceived risk, or in cases where they've actually been shut down or any kind of restrictions put in place. But what you can see here, which I thought might be interesting, is if we took a look at food manufacturing, you can see that not only has it recovered from April, it's actually much higher than it was in the past. And that's kind of the case of how things are going to be looking right now. Is it all depends on how you're impacted by this particular pandemic. The other point too is, if we look at unemployment rates, same kind of issue really. We were down at about 3.1%, which is historically still quite low, even though the last couple of years we'd seen that ticking up a little bit. We were still in growth territory in terms of the overall economy. And then in April, it rocketed up to 13.6%. which is like nothing we've ever seen. The data for this particular trend series, the unemployment rate, it only goes back to 1976 for the states. And in that time, we've never seen anything quite like this. It's possible that maybe we would have seen something similar, rates similar in the Great Depression, but we don't really have the data for that. Now you can see now it's back to 5.4%. So again, like the jobs numbers, better than it was, but we're still not back to where we were. And that's what we're likely to see in the coming months, assuming everything stays the same and we don't have a sudden surge. We probably won't see things recover back to where they were until a year or two down the road. We're expecting to see the impact of this drag on the economy into 2021 and possibly into 2022 as well. Now, it's hard to say exactly what the magnitude of that'll be. I mean, it won't be anything likely like the last recession or anything like that, but we will be feeling the impacts of this for a while. So, all that said, you're going to want to use every tool at your disposal right now, because it isn't probably an easy job market, certainly not compared to what it was. I mean, pre-COVID, we were looking at a situation in which it was basically a job seekers market. There was a lot of demand for talent, and we had the retiring baby boomers leaving the labor force. So it was a good time to be looking for work. And I'll probably talk about this a little bit more later on in the presentation, but we will be seeing those conditions again. But right now, we have to weather the pandemic, and that's kind of what we'll be seeing. So the first tool I'm going to show you here is Job Center of Wisconsin. So this is Wisconsin's job search tool. And you can see you can do a lot of things like here, like I was saying, you can link back to Wisconomy and find some labor market information. There's a lot of other tools on here. Right now, I'll just show you how to search for jobs. It's very easy, and I'm sure that you're all very familiar with this kind of interface. But if I were to just look for a certain job like accountant, I could just type that in there and go ahead and search, and it would show me all of the openings for something like that. Now, there are more advanced tools in here. There's a more advanced search and a map search and skills match. A lot of these tools, you're going to have to create a login to access and to save your searches and save your resume, things like that. And I would highly recommend doing that. It's the same as creating a logon for most other online services. But this will be very useful for finding jobs in Wisconsin. Now, one way that I personally prefer to look for jobs is using this My LMI tool. There are a lot of cool things you can find in here. Basically, they're all widgets, like little apps, just kind of built into this interface. You can do things like find training if you wanted to, if you needed, say, licensing or different things like that for certain occupations. You can check out wages. This is what I like to use when I'm looking for particular job openings. And I'm going to put in veterinary technician, if I can spell it. I'll try and use occupations that I know that a lot of you may actually be in at UW River Falls. And okay, so there's vet techs. We'll just select it from that, and boom, it's easy enough to just find the jobs right on here. And what's cool is that then I can look around the state and say, oh, well, there's 27 in Dane County. I can just click on that, and it will actually take me right back to the JCW, Job Center of Wisconsin openings, from which you can actually, check out the opening and apply and all of that. But you will, again, need your login to do those things. But it's pretty useful. So now we'll go back to wisconomy.com again, and I'll show you another tool that might be useful as well. This is the occupation projections. So basically, every state has to create these projections every couple of years that give us a sense of what kind of occupations jobs we're going to be needing in the future. And you can see the entire list here, and I'm just going to pick another occupation that I know there are a lot of grads in at UW River Falls. And you can see, like here, I'm just going to, what I like to do is uncheck all these first. I mean, this is a really exhaustive list. And then you can actually just start typing in here. I'm going to look for elementary school teachers, and that was easy enough to find right there. And then I'll just click outside, and you can see right off the bat, there you go. So there are actually expected to be almost 2,700 openings every year in Wisconsin for this particular field. So obviously, if you're graduating in this, it's still going to be a good time for you to look for work. Admittedly, things might be a little bit different in terms of the application process and all of that, but we will still be seeing all of these job openings down the road. One thing to note is that even though a lot of fields, some won't necessarily see new openings, but there will be replacements all across the board as the baby boomers retire. So we could actually go in here and check out a lot of different occupations and bring them all to the list if we wanted to. We could take vet techs, and we could bring in, say, animal breeders, anything like that, really. And we'll get the information on it, in like how many job openings we expect. So we expect to see about 212 job openings every year for veterinary techs. With and there's your average, your median wage, and the growth we expect in the field. So you can see that there's actually a lot of openings for a lot of these fields. There's expected to be, and especially as the economy normalizes again throughout Wisconsin. And I know that a lot of the students there at UW River Falls are from Minnesota. And I guess I would just say, consider checking out some of these openings in Wisconsin. It's very common during any time really, but especially during a down economy to move for that first job. And throughout, with Wisconsin, we've got an interesting situation of everything from major metros like Milwaukee and Madison to smaller metros like Eau Claire, La Crosse, Hudson area, where you could be near to larger cities, or even up north like Superior, Duluth. Our economic activity is actually spread out all throughout Wisconsin, which is unusual compared to a lot of other states. But it means that regardless of what kind of place you'd like to live in, we do have opportunities all throughout. So another thing to note is that in general, when you're experiencing a tougher economy, you might need to widen your search a little bit more than just the occupations that you would expect to be going to school for. I mean, like generally, you say, we'll take economist, for example, which was what I went to school for. And, you think, okay, well, what can you do with that? Well, be an economist. But there are so many other possible titles and possible fields of employment that are related to that. Everything from finance to banking to analysts. And it's common to sort of narrow your focus to just the field you're in without thinking about where else your skills might translate and what other career paths you might be able to follow. So one really useful tool we have here is called Skill Explorer. You can get there just by clicking on this from jobcenterwisconsin.com. And here's the interface. So I'm going to take another field that I know there are a lot of at UW River Falls, like business administration. And I'm going to go with, so a common path out of that would be human resources. So I'm just going to click Find My Matches here. And we'll go with human resource managers. Okay, so now from this, you can see that not only are there 260 current openings for that particular occupation, and then if I clicked on this, you would just go right back to these openings on jobcenterwisconsin.com, which is awesome. I mean, everything links right back to getting you to that job opening. which is really handy. But let's say, okay, so say we're not having any luck with any of these applications, you might need to widen your search a little bit. So what else could we do that shares some of the skills with human resource managers? In this case, there's education administrators, training and development managers, even financial managers. Well, we're going to go with training and development managers, which you would probably think of with human resources, but we'll click on that anyway just to kind of show you how this works. You can see that there were 38 openings for that throughout Wisconsin as well. And the first thing that happens is it takes you to this page, and you'll recognize this from that job opening widget that I showed you earlier on My LMI. And basically, you could just click on any of these to be taken right to the job openings in this new specialty. And you can actually see some of those listings here as well. What I do think is useful is you can actually see how much of a skills overlap you do have, and where you might need a little more. In this case, you might need a little more emphasis on learning strategies, a little more emphasis on speaking maybe, or instructing than human resources manager have. So that way you'll actually be able to say, well, here's how I can either acquire those skills, or else you can adjust your resume or your application and say, well, maybe during college I did a side job that actually did involve a lot of instructing. And using those kinds of bits and pieces, you can put together a resume for this particular field, and you might even find yourself in a new career path here as well. Now, one thing I will say about widening your search like this, one quick note here too is that it will often tell you the requirements for entry, and in cases where there's actual licenses needed, this particular tool will show you that as well. But in terms of widening your search, that first job out of college can be pretty important, and sometimes it can set the path that you're headed on for you. Just kind of looking at what kind of field you go into and which way you go first. I can tell you that the first job I took out of college wasn't exactly the pathway I wanted to go on, and I kept paying attention to that, and I would recommend that you do that as well. In a tough economy, you may have to take something that doesn't necessarily fit with your dream job. You may find it's what you're looking for all along, and that it is the career pathway you want to head down, but you can always work your way back to where you were, maybe with some new skills that you didn't have before. So what I would recommend is, with that first job out of college, do try and find something that does use your degree. If you can, it'd be great if you avoid being underemployed for too long. I know it's tempting to just grab whatever job is out there and say to yourself, well, I'll get back on career track in a while. But it's easy to start making money and just kind of end up sitting there for a few years and realizing that you've kind of lost track of the career that you actually wanted. So I'm not saying not to get a job or anything like that. I'm just saying keep one eye on your career pathway at all times. You want to know where you're headed and have a plan to get there. And sometimes that means changing jobs, and sometimes that means getting your foot in the door with a company that you really want to work for, maybe not exactly in the occupation you want, and being upfront and saying, well, this is what I'd like to do for you, and I'm enjoying this job right now, but I'd like to do this, and I have the skills and experience for that, so that you don't get too typecast with what you're doing. And another useful tool here is Ownet Online. And it works very well with something like Skill Explorer. In fact, a lot of the data on Skill Explorer comes from this particular tool. And this is actually a national tool, but what I like about this is if, for example, you were looking back at Skills Explorer and you were trying to find out a little bit more about what a trainer does, while there is a description there on Skills Explorer as well, here on Ownet, you'll find an exhaustive skills needed, the knowledge needed, abilities, activities, things of nature that really, that You find that 58% of respondents here had a bachelor's degree. So you whether that's what you're looking for. So Ownet can actually be pretty useful as well. And one more thing, it's actually pretty good for career exploration. I will tell you that in national surveys, probably like 40% of the surveys are still working with their career services specialists. And that's a fantastic resource you have available at your college there. And I would tell you, my advice would be to work with them often and let them help you figure out which pathway you want to go down and direct your career towards that. Another thing I can tell you too is that your relationship with career services doesn't have to end right at graduation as well. I mean, if you take a different job right off the bat and you're saying, you know, I'd really like to get back to this pathway. How do I do that? What can I do to find the skills I need to get back in there? You know, your career services is probably willing to help you and has a lot of resources and useful knowledge that you might not be familiar with. So don't be afraid to work with them. So that brings us to another piece here. And oftentimes, even though we look on places like Job Center of Wisconsin or Indeed, Monster, you name it, you might find that, for one, some employers may not even advertise their openings on those sites, and two, I mean, they may not advertise at all. So in a lot of ways, in a lot of cases, it can be very useful to actually start researching companies that you'd like to work for and contacting them directly or going to their web pages to see whether they have job openings posted there. I mean, there are companies that actually only take applications through their own system. I couldn't tell you what percent that is, but it's always worth checking out any company that you're thinking of working for. So here we are on Wisconomy again, and I'm going to show you another tool that's actually pretty useful for that. And it's basically called the employer search. So what we can do here is, first I'll just look at the major employers, and we'll pick one county here. I think we'll go with, let's go with St. Croix County this time. And just clicking here, it'll give you the major employers in the county. Now, one little caveat, this particular data source, as you can see down here, doesn't actually come from the Department of Workforce Development. It's actually an info group national database that, through cooperative agreements, all the states have access to. But I can't tell you that it's perfect. There will definitely be employers missing in this, but it's a good start. And if you're looking for a particular employer and you can't find them on here, Google is your friend as well. I've used it many times to find employers myself. But here you can see a list of some of the major employers just in St. Croix County. And looking down here, I might see, let's see here, let's pick one that's interesting. Lakeside Foods. So we can see from right here, you can find where they're located. You can get a telephone number. Sometimes you'll have a website. In this case, there isn't, but this is something you could easily Google as well, especially with some of the information up here. But it's handy to have this to be able to contact them and look to see whether they have any job openings, or maybe see if they have someone who's interested in talking to you about what kind of career pathways they have and what they might have available for someone in your situation. And it's never a waste of time to do some research on an employer, or contact them yourself, or just go to their website, however they'd like to be contacted. It's worthwhile, especially right now when you need to widen that net a little bit and really put in a little more legwork to find possibly that first job. So for example, if we were going to look for a particular employer, I'm just going to pick one in the food industry in general. or Sargento. And there we can see them in Plymouth and Sheboygan. And there you've got the website, you've got contact information, a little more information about the company themselves. And so if that were someplace that you were interested in applying, you'd have some of this to go from right off the bat. So I hope these tools have been useful for you. And I do have some more general advice that should be helpful in a down market, but really would be helpful anytime. And the first thought I have for you is one thing we saw during the last recession first of all, nobody really gets to pick when they graduate. I didn't either, and I actually experienced some issues with that myself, but you might be able to time it out a little bit if you're in a specialty where you feel like you wanted to get additional education, whether you needed another degree to get into the field you were looking at, or maybe just some additional training or an additional certification, or maybe even a graduate degree. Whatever you need, if you need extra education, during a down market for hiring might be a useful time to go about that. During the last recession, I was going to say a lot of people actually did choose to just pursue a graduate degree instead of graduating right during that, and then found themselves in a more desirable position as the recession ended and they came out with their final degree. So if you're one of the people who you're figuring that your specialty might actually require, or it might prove useful to have additional education, you might want to consider now as a time to take advantage of that. And again, there's no telling what you'll see for the market when you do graduate, but so it's always a risk. But if you were looking at additional education anyway, now might not be a bad time to pursue that. Some other advice I would give you would be make sure you have some experience. You need that degree. You have to come out with the certification, whatever it is that you need. But a lot of times employers will look for experience, and in a tighter job market, that's going to be one of the things that separates successful candidates from those who don't get selected. So you might say, well, if I can't get that first job, how do I get experience? And that's not an easy question, but there are a lot of things you can do that will help you out that you can put down on your resume as experience. Things like internships are a huge one. There's almost always internships to be found, and in some cases, they might even be required as part of your coursework or as a capstone or something of that nature. And whether paid or unpaid, that can be a very useful thing to put down on your resume. Also, you can get experience from things like volunteer activities or even apprenticeships, or really any number of ways. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to have some experience down there that, if it applies to the field you're looking at, that's what you're going for. And you also don't want a ton of resume gaps necessarily either. If you end up just kind of sitting this out and saying, well, I'll look for work after this, or if you happen to be in the position where you can do that, great for you. But employers will often look at a year-long gap in a resume and say, well, what was going on here? And that can sometimes be a bit of a barrier. So you don't necessarily want a lot of unaccounted for time on your resume, especially if you're going to be doing a chronological type. Another thing I would tell you, and maybe the most important right now, is be adaptable. Not only is that essentially one of the most desired soft skills when businesses are surveyed on those kinds of things, adaptability it's going to be important for just about everything going forward, because their change is so rapid. Even before we had COVID to deal with, technological change in businesses was really ramping up, and we were seeing a lot of disruption within various industries, and you have to be able to be adaptable to deal with that. the duties of whatever job and whatever field you go into will be changing constantly. And rather than giving a presentation to a group of students, for example, you might find yourself recording something on Zoom. so remember that you have to be adaptable and willing to learn new skills. You'll commit to lifelong learning throughout your whole career pathway, and you can't go wrong with that. Adaptability in general is also going to be important in the job search right now, because it's so much of it's going to be virtual. And I mean, I can tell you that at least personally, from in the past when I looked for work, that I personally always found virtual interviews and things like that kind of difficult, because you weren't actually there. You miss so many of the cues like body language and things like that. But right now with COVID, we're going to see a lot more virtual and a lot more telework for that matter. And really, the adaptability is going to play into what we're going to see post-COVID, because some of the things like working from home, which is a great thing, probably not going to go away. Maybe it may decrease some, but some of the trends that we see right now, with fewer face-to-face meetings, things of that nature, this may become the new normal, even post-COVID, just because technology will enable us to do this, and there's a cost savings for businesses, and a lot of times employees might actually prefer a schedule of working from the office some, working from home some, or maybe working from home full time. So that adaptability, again, is going to be key to finding a new job, and also to your career going forward in general. Okay, sorry for shifting you through my screens there for a little bit. I have a lot of things open, but what I guess the last thing I wanted to say is that I actually did graduate during a down market as well. Quite a while ago. It was during the 2002-2003 recession, and the first thing I did was found a job outside of after college, but it wasn't really in my field or anything. I was just temping, and I just happened to luck out and find a job with an organization that then was looking for my skill set, and I found myself in my first actual position. So that is something that you could look at. Like I was telling you before, you can do deliberately what I did accidentally, and look at businesses that may actually hire your type of employment and get your foot in the door there. But again, be careful not to get typecast in the position you're hired into, and be aware that you want to use that degree. But the main part of my story there is that I was actually laid off not long after that from that first position as the economy hit a recession. And I found myself having to do basically everything that I've advised you to do. I had to widen my net and be willing to move. And I took that time as well to evaluate and make sure that I wanted to be on the pathway I was on. And I had always wanted to be an economist for the government, and I found my way back into that kind of employment. And here I am today. So I guess I would just say, stay positive. This economic conditions that are happening right now, I can guarantee you one thing about the economy in general, that it's never going to be static. So you will always have a changing conditions, and this will improve. And once we're through this current pandemic situation, we will almost certainly be back in a situation where we're in a labor crunch once again, and it'll be a good market. And not only that, I mean, as the baby boomers retire, there will probably be a lot of opportunities for advancement as well. So keep that in mind. It might be things might be tough right now, but there are by no means no jobs out there. There are plenty of openings out there, and things will get better. So I'll just say thanks for having me, and I hope that you find the job you're looking for as you graduate.